There is so much NFL on ESPN right now. Monday Night Football, plus pregame and postgame. NFL Live, NFL Primetime. Everything you need to stay on top of every game, every week.
Unbelievable.
And now NFL Network is on the ESPN app. More football, more coverage, more ways to watch. Football's on all season long on ESPN and streaming on the ESPN app.
This podcast is brought to you by Versed. Guys wear that guys wear. This fantasy football draft season, Versed Limitless Pants should be at the top of every guy's watch list. Because while some guys are sweating whether to risk it all on an up-and-coming rookie, fall back on a trusted vet, or to just ride with whatever the auto draft tosses at them, gearing up with the Limitless Collection's versatility, comfort, and style is always a sure thing. Versed. Guys wear that guys wear. Only at Dick's.
Cozy season is ahead, and you'll be spending way more time inside. Is your home ready? Don't worry. With Wayfair, you can upgrade your space without breaking the bank. Score up to 70% off during their Labor Day clearance on furniture, area rugs, mattresses, and more. Plus, surprise flash deals you can't miss. Whether it's one room or the whole house, Wayfair has pieces for every style and budget.
Shop Wayfair's Labor Day clearance now through September 7th at wayfair.com.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
Trust in the media. Those of us who are in the media like to think that we're trustworthy, that everyone loves us, that we are the arbiters of truth. That's not necessarily how the public sees us. Hello and welcome to the Full Comment Podcast. My name's Brian Lilly, your host. In Canada, there's a bit more trust in the media than in the United States, but it's still on a downward trend. And yet in the United States, 70% of people say they have no trust in the media. It is an ideological divide. In both countries, conservatives are more likely to say that they don't trust the media. More liberal-leaning people say they do. I wonder why that is. Joining us now to talk about trust in the media is Tara Henley. You may know her story from her departure from CBC after a long career there. Her new book is called The Trust Spiral: Why the Media Needs Objectivity. Tara, thanks for the time.
Thank you so much for having me.
For people that don't know your rather noisy departure from CBC, if they don't know that story, give us your elevator pitch version of it.
Yeah, so I had been at the CBC for quite a while. I started there in 2013 at the George Stroumboulopoulos Tonight Show as an interview producer, and then I went to Current Affairs Radio, and I worked on and off in Current Affairs Radio until the end of 2021. I worked on roughly a dozen shows in Vancouver and in Toronto in a number of different roles, chase producer, morning producer, night producer, occasionally director, just a lot of rank and file roles at the organization. And over the time that I was there, I found it harder and harder to get more different views on the air. And particularly during the pandemic, I found it a very frustrating time to be a journalist in those newsrooms, and decided eventually that I would leave. I was on contract. I ended my contract a year early and went to Substack. I wrote a post. I've written controversial things in this country before. I really expected that it would get ignored. That's typically what happens, and that is not what happened in this instance.
You have since spent a lot of time doing media criticism. You and I have been on podcasts together before talking about that with people like Senator Pamela Wallin, who had her own long and storied career in journalism. I would say it's definitely changed in my 25 plus years of being in the business. But talk to me about what it was like trying to get different views on CBC. And I'll put it in this context. I'm probably Canada's most widely read conservative-leaning political columnist. My audience is huge. I was on CBC once in the last couple of years because I criticized Donald Trump's ambassador to the United States. And then they were like, aha, we can have someone say, Pete Hoekstra is a no good you so-and-so. Other than that, they're not interested in a diversity of views, are they?
I wish I could say otherwise. I'm an institution person. I believe in preserving institutions. I would like to see the CBC thrive and survive. My experience there was that there was a lot of groupthink in newsrooms, that the editorial discussions, and some of this stuff is more subtle than the public might imagine. It's just that you understand that certain stories are not kind of a no-go, and other stories are fine. That, at one point I actually wrote a post for Substack about the exact contours of that consensus that I encountered in the newsroom. I think there's a lot of different things going on at the CBC. I think the CBC shares a lot of its problems with the press corps across North America, and that is that many of us live in these big, expensive cities. Many of us are highly educated. We are secular. We are progressive. Politically, and we have a very narrow life experience, really. And this did not used to be the case in newsrooms. There's a great study in the United States that has tracked the demographics of journalists over time, and it used to be that I think the numbers I don't have them handy, but it's something like 58% had a college degree, in the 70s, and now it's 95%. And not only that, a lot of us have advanced degrees. In the United States, a lot of people have Ivy League degrees, and in the past with the media, before the media was kind of consolidated and centralized in these big urban coastal cities, you would have journalists going to basically a farm team. You would start in small places. You would live in a lot of different places. You would live in rural places. You would encounter conservatives as well as liberals and everything in between. You would understand that the views that we in the journalist class hold are actually outliers. This is not the default position for most people in the public. And so I think that has just really led to an atmosphere in newsrooms where people just don't have contact with people outside of our bubble. And in fact, the CBC's Brodie Fenlon has acknowledged that dynamic in a public event called Trust Talks that I covered a while back.
I'm laughing because I don't fit the mold that you're talking about. I only went to a 2-year college degree, which my detractors love to remind me of. I did not go to a fancy school. I worked in smaller centers before moving on to big ones. I did what you described how it used to be. And it's not because I'm from that age. It's just how my career went. And the groupthink that I started to encounter, going back to, there is or was a press gallery at Montreal City Hall. That's where I started to first notice the groupthink, and then covering provincial politics in both Quebec and Ontario, and then getting to Parliament Hill and it hitting me like a wall going, how is it that we've got 308 people up here and one point of view?
Yeah, it is a very fascinating thing to track and to try to measure. And I think the biggest thing, now that I'm talking about the book, more people are saying, what is one thing that we could do? Well, one thing that we could do that would be very simple would be to remove the degree requirement in hiring for journalists. I don't think we need degrees. A lot of my mentors didn't even have high school diplomas, let alone college degrees. I mean,
Yeah.
this is a trade. It's a craft. It's something you learn on the ground, and that you learn through mentorship and through trial and error, through making your mistakes, ideally in lower stakes settings in these smaller kind of locations. This is not it's not rocket science.
Okay, let's get into the solutions in a little bit, but let's start at the problem.
Yeah.
And so in your book, The Trust Spiral, I want to read the first couple of sentences of the opening. Leading up to the 2016 election, the U.S. media collectively lost its cool. Trump had long been a source of entertainment, a smug punchline, a ratings boon. But as election day neared, his habit of disparaging the press began to grate, and his knack for dominating the news cycle with outlandish claims started to raise legitimate alarms. The feeling that Trump was an extraordinary candidate and that ordinary journalism was insufficient to the task of covering him began to solidify. Is 2016 and Donald Trump, and of course that was also the year of Brexit, which most of the media just sneered at the idea of Brexit. How could these people want this? Was that kind of like the jump the shark moment for you in your view of how things progressed in the media in this trust spiral that we're in, which is a downward spiral, I would say.
Yes, I think that it is, but I think what we need to understand is that the underlying conditions that made that possible were our economic precarity, that you had decades of a collapsing business model, as we've already kind of talked about it, the consolidation in these big cities. We had a lot of underlying conditions. And my contention is that the economic precarity really led to a lot of panicked thinking in the journalism class.
Okay, economic precarity among journalists or in the public writ large, or both?
Among journalists and within journalism organizations. And so you have a class of people who have gone to university, who have done everything right in their mind and still are in a position where many of us in this country are in. It's hard to get a journalism job. When you get them, it might be a contract. It might not be a full-time position. And, in some cases at the CBC, you have a huge temporary workforce that doesn't even have contracts. I've been in that position as well, where you get your shifts 2 weeks at a time. That does not breed courageous journalism. If you are not sure how you're going to pay your rent, you are going to be timid. That's just a reality. And the same goes for journalism organizations. If you don't know if you're going to meet your bottom line, if you are juggling different revenue streams and terrified that the organization is about to collapse, that also doesn't breed courage. And so my contention is that this is the underlying situation that we found ourselves in. And then along comes President Trump, and the overreaction to him, I think, is a part of that kind of panicked precarity that we were already in. And so you can actually track the reaction in the press. There are a trail of op-eds that say that Donald Trump is not an ordinary candidate. He is an extraordinary one. And that, in fact, what we need to do in order to cover him is to throw out the playbook that we have been using in journalism newsrooms. Jim Rettenberg at the New York Times says explicitly this in an op-ed. And you can see that thinking proliferate throughout the media. And you can see the resulting erosion of standards and practices. And my argument in the book is that really what is at the heart of lost trust in the media is a lack of accuracy. And where did that lack of accuracy came from? It's because we threw out our standards.
Well, there have been many calls for journalism not to be objective anymore.
Yes.
That, look, I'm an opinion writer. I did not start out as an opinion writer. I started out as a by the book, down the straight and narrow. That's how I was trained. You have to consider multiple angles, views, and tell a story. Since the appearance of Donald Trump on the American political scene, there have been calls to say, get rid of objectivity. This is an outdated notion. Now, I would say this. Newspapers have always had a political bent in their editorial stance. Broadcasters know, but most reporters would try and stay away from that. Everybody's an analyst now. Everybody is an opinion person. Do you see much objective journalism? There's still good reporters out there. I don't want to say there's none. We can see them, but everyone seems to want to be an analyst and give you their personal point of view. And I'm sorry if you've just started in the business. I really don't want to hear it.
Yeah, I think that everybody, just in the general public right now, everybody is a broadcaster, everybody has an opinion. And also just to acknowledge that we're living in incredibly turbulent times and very volatile times in this country as well. There are a lot of contentious issues and people have a lot of opinions. That's not necessarily a bad thing for democracy, but for journalists, I think that, and some of the big fights in journalism over objectivity have come down to things like what are news gathering journalists and current affairs journalists, which is what I am and the umbrella that I was under at the CBC. What are you allowed to say on social media? And the problem with everybody expressing their opinions all the time on social media, and often because of the incentives on social media in very inflammatory and sometimes malicious ways, is that it does erode trust. If you are spouting off on X and you are getting in fights on that platform and the public is watching. They see your views. And how are they going to take a look at your news reporting? A classic case of this was during the trucker convoy. How are they going to look at your news reporting and not see the opinions that you've already stated in public? And so I think that's a really clear line between the standards and practices eroding and the lost public trust.
Yeah, forget about journalists. How about judges making public comments about the convoy and then still trying to weigh in on it? So how does the lack of trust relate to the broken business model that you detail in the book? We've all seen the massive layoffs, and the reason for the massive layoffs is simple. We still have audiences. People are still reading newspapers, but they're reading them online. People are still reading the news stories that are generated by the TV networks, because the TV networks are now essentially newspapers and the newspapers are now essentially broadcasters. We're all trying to throw everything at the wall. But despite still having a decent audience, the advertising all goes to into Google and Meta. And I'm not asking, do we go and get the money off of them and force? It's not what I'm asking. But how does the broken business model lead to an erosion of trust? Are we in too much of a hurry? I mean, I remember when I started, you get a report and you'd have time to read it before you reported on it. Now you get it and you've got to be immediately online or on air talking about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in the book, I quote Jen Gerson from The Line on this very question. And she's very good at explaining exactly how this all collapsed. And, one of her points is that prior to Donald Trump, all of this was in play already, because you had, the newsrooms gutted. And who leaves in a newsroom when it's gutted? It's often the senior people who are making the most money right now, So you lose the newsroom hierarchy, you lose the mentorship. And she talks about a situation in Calgary where she was writing straight to the page at the end of her time in the newsroom there, that there was no editorial process. And so, of course, errors go up and typos go up. So that already begins to degrade the product that we're putting out into the public. And it begins to degrade trust as well, because if the public is reading the newspaper and they're seeing typos and they're seeing mistakes that they know are mistakes, so all of that is already in motion ahead of time. And that is all strictly business model stuff. And to your point about having to digest huge amounts of information so quickly. I mean, I've been a journalist for 25 years. I have never seen an information environment like the one that we are in right now. There is just so much going on. It is a tidal wave all the time. And we are doing much more too. I mean, when I was at the CBC, in current affairs, I was doing 2 stories a day, every day. And on the radio shows I was working on, I was told that, prior to that era, you would do 1. So, I mean, that's a huge difference. Learning 1 story a day, calling around, finding guests, writing a script, fact-checking all of it, 1 versus 2. So the volume is there. But I also think that we in the profession are having the same problem that the public is having, in that it is very difficult sometimes now to figure out what's actually going on. There is so much information and it is so fast.
But in terms of hollowing out the business, you touch on something that most people overlook. Craigslist. It's pretty much gone now, but so are the little tiny ads that paid for so much. The classified ads in a newspaper used to be a cash cow. And when I worked for Quebecor, back when they owned the Toronto Sun and the whole Sun media chain, they also owned Le Journal de Montréal, which went on a multi-year, I believe it was, lockout. And the way it was explained to me is they were going to go on strike. And in Quebec, you don't let anyone go on strike. You lock them out because of, weird labor practices in Quebec. But they were going to go on strike to try and keep the jobs of the women who took the ads in the classified section. But those were no longer going on. And so they said, no, we're striking to keep these jobs. The lockout lasts forever. By the time they come back, I forget the exact numbers, but it was maybe 20 to 30% of the journalists that had been putting the paper out before the lockout were able to come back, and the rest of the jobs were eliminated because the money just wasn't there. The major advertising has gone away, but those classified ads paid for so much.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, one of the big mistakes that journalism made was not just creating our own online classifieds at that time. We didn't see the writing on the wall.
There's one company that did, at least their Australian division, News Corp, which owns Fox News, Wall Street Journal. They did that with, I think, classifieds in real estate very early on, but they only did it in Australia and not in the US or anywhere else. And so that helps them, but everywhere else, that's a lot of money gone.
Yeah. The other thing that we're dealing with in this country as well is that people are habituated to not pay for news. And that's a problem that's going to have to be solved as well here.
Just before we take a break then, let me ask you about that. CBC, and I don't want to make this all about CBC, but for those of us in the private sector trying to make money, and people say put up a paywall, how do you do that when the public broadcaster gives away everything for free?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things to say about the CBC. I do support continuing with the CBC and continuing funding the CBC. I think in a country that is the size that we are and as diverse as we are, as regionally spread out as we are, I do think that the public broadcaster could play a really important role in both establishing a shared set of facts and forging national cohesion. I think those are two really important roles. I think the CBC has done that at different points in the past. I don't think that they are living up to that mandate right now, but I would love to see them do that in the future. Where I think we have gone wrong is in subsidizing the private newsrooms. So now everybody is subsidized except for a few kind of small startups. And that I think is very difficult to innovate. I think that we do need change in this country, in the media, and the problem with everybody being subsidized is that, again, you have the public not paying, and it doesn't incentivize the public to communicate to us journalists what it is that they need from us and what they are prepared to support. And so all the signals get mixed, and I think that's the point that we are in right now.
Well, and it also erodes the trust that you write about here in the book, because people think we're all on the take, and I don't know if you've heard, but I'm in Mark Carney's back pocket. That's the claim.
I encounter that all the time, that opinion all the time, and I've seen it expressed from a ton of journalists that I've interviewed. I've seen it expressed in committee by Unifor. I mean, this is definitely a thing that is happening in this country, is that the public do feel that the journalism is compromised when it is paid for by the government. And I think that is something we're going to have to face.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk to you about objective versus neutral. How do you get back to a place that maybe the public does start to trust us? But first, I have to tell the audience all about our merch, because yes, we've got a store. We're going to sell you merch. Keep the lights on, all of that. Do you want to bring your National Post or Toronto Sun support beyond the headline? Shop the official merch store. We've got hoodies, hats, mugs, tote bags, and more, designed for readers who like their journalism bold. Visit postmedia.store today. That's postmedia.store.
There is so much NFL on ESPN right now. Monday Night Football, plus pregame and postgame. NFL Live, NFL Primetime. Everything you need to stay on top of every game, every week.
Unbelievable.
And now NFL Network is on the ESPN app. More football, more coverage, more ways to watch. Football's on all season long on ESPN and streaming on the ESPN app.
Priceline Negotiator.
It's me, the
Priceline Negotiator.
We don't need the jingle twice.
What about a third time?
Stop it. This is about vacation inflation and how Priceline negotiates amazing deals on hotels, flights, and rental cars.
Seems like you decided.
Yeah, but I didn't mention that you can save up to 60% off hotels in the Priceline app.
Time to read the tagline.
Fine. No one deals more deals than
Priceline.
Please stop.
Priceline.
Touché.
Priceline.
Priceline.
This podcast is brought to you by Versed. Guys wear that guys wear. This fantasy football draft season, Verse Limitless pants should be at the top of every guy's watch list. Because while some guys are sweating whether to risk it all on an up-and-coming rookie, fall back on a trusted vet, or to just ride with whatever the auto draft tosses at them, gearing up with the Limitless Collection's versatility, comfort, and style is always a sure thing. Versed. Guys wear that guys wear. Only at Dick's.
You're a political junkie, right? I mean, that's why you're listening to this podcast.
But if you're not in the loop with Postmedia's VIP political hack, then you're not getting even close to the whole politics story.
I'm Stuart Thompson, Parliamentary Bureau Chief.
And I'm political analyst Tasha Carradine.
We head up the team that brings Political Hack members the exclusive political intel that goes so much deeper than the news. With inside stories, sharp analysis, and behind-the-scenes scoops from Parliament Hill and beyond.
With our twice-weekly newsletters, exclusive reports from Washington, D.C., early access to John Ivison columns, and subscriber-only videos and events, Hack members get insider insight into the minds of the strategists, policy gurus, and power brokers shaping Canada's political future.
You don't want to miss all that, do you?
I sure don't. And you can get all now for less than $1 a week. Just go to nationalpost.com/newsletters to sign up.
That's nationalpost.com/newsletters.
So much is happening in politics right now. Rising tensions with the U.S. on trade and defense.
Not one, but two provincial separatist movements gaining real ground.
The Liberals trying to hang on to a razor-thin majority as the economy stumbles and with the cost of living still rising.
It's exciting.
Extremely exciting.
But the only way to get behind the scenes and right into the source code of what politicians and the people around them are really thinking is to get Political Hack.
Go to nationalpost.com/newsletters.
And join us.
The title of the book is The Trust Spiral: Why the Media Needs Objectivity. Tell me what you mean by objectivity. Does it mean being neutral? Does it mean saying, well, we have to tell both sides of the story every single time? What does it mean to you?
So I'm going back to the original meaning of when it evolved. And so I think a lot of people are not aware of this. I think a lot of people do think it means that you believe that you're neutral. And of course, none of us can be truly neutral. That is, we're human beings. We all have our own opinions and biases and all the rest. How it evolved was in the United States, you had, in the 19th century, you had these papers that were funded by partisans. They were funded by political parties and political actors. And then you had
in
the
the
evolution.
United States, the Toronto Star became what it is because a bunch of Sir Wilfrid Laurier donors decided to buy it.
So then you had the evolution of the penny press, and that was starting to move towards subscribers and advertising as a business model, and was taking a more democratic approach to the news. It was covering more topics. It was more interested in the experience of regular people. And around that same time, you saw the rise of the New York Times, which kind of set the standard, saying that we're going to cover the news without fear or favor. And it was also in the aftermath of World War I and a pretty egregious reporting failures, and also the rise of public relations and the attempts to manipulate public passions. All of that was happening. And then you also had, thinkers and that were being taught widely, that were, philosophers talking a lot more about cynicism and about critical thinking. And so in the wake of all of that, journalism understood that we needed to come up with a set of standards and practices that would mitigate against our own biases. And of course, at that time in history, the scientific method was really revered. And so the idea was that you have this set of standards and practices that will help us to overcome our biases and produce news that is both reliable and replicable. And so the way that I think about objectivity is just this collection of standards and practices. It is not about me trying to say that I'm neutral or even trying to behave in neutral ways. It's just trying to follow these practices. And so some of those practices are, the minutia of it is like not using inflammatory language in headlines. It is definitely not being beholden to one perspective, to interviewing a range of perspectives. It is having people of different perspectives in a newsroom so that you have, editors going over your work from a different perspective, trying to find the holes in that. I mean, there's a lot there. And unfortunately, when we talk about media standards and practices, most people's eyes glaze over, but the consequences of not following those things are quite extreme, as we have seen in the last, especially 5 years, with a lot of big stories going sideways.
Yeah, I remember as a young journalist talking about this issue with one of my news directors, and he said, "You can't be unbiased. Everyone has a bias. We all have a personal point of view, a world view, a religious view, a cultural view. But I need you to be objective.
That's such a
Go out
great way
there
of putting it.
and be
Yeah.
objective." Now, so some people say we can't be objective because of, and you write about this in the book, let me say it correctly, both sidism. But, you know, I know you cite Christiana Amanpour from CNN saying, well, you can't be neutral. And I get it, you can't be neutral, but you can still tell both sides of the story, even she was talking about her experience in Bosnia. Horrible, horrible experiences in that war. You can still tell both sides of the story. It doesn't mean you're taking the side of the Bosnians or the Serbs. But why are they each acting in that way, I think, is part of the story that you should be telling.
Yes, and the whole both sidesism argument is really baffling to me, and it has been interpreted very broadly in this country as a no platforming argument, as in, it started out with this idea of false balance, the idea being that you don't cover both sides equally because one side is more legitimate than the other. Now, I don't know who's supposed to make that moral assessment, and especially at digital speed, but there you go. That's that argument. Then that argument was interpreted as some people's arguments are so egregious that we will not be putting them on air. And then the list of who those people were and what those topics were expanded and expanded and expanded.
Oh, you mentioned the word list. I know how excited everyone got when Travis Danraj went before the committee, the Commons Heritage Committee, and mentioned a list. Got people talking.
Yes, I'm talking about a metaphoric list right now. I'm talking about not a literal list, but the point here is just that we have come to in the mainstream in this country on a lot of issues believe that there are some people's opinions that are just beyond the pale, and certainly in some major issues maybe that's the case, but we have applied it so broadly that you have mainstream opinions that many Canadians hold, for example, in the gender debate, that are not represented in news articles. And this stuff you can measure. And in fact, Dave Snow has for the Hub. And I think it just really, first of all, I think it really irritates the public, but also it really erodes public trust, because if you are not reflecting the range of views that are out there, you're not reflecting reality.
I remember being at a news conference a few years ago, and the gender issue came up, and it was about whether parents should be notified if their child is going to transition at school. And there was a fresh poll out from the Angus Reid Institute saying that 70% of people said, hell yeah, mom and dad should know if the kid is going to transition at school. Teachers should not keep that secret. That would tell you if 70% back something, that's not a controversial opinion. And I'm standing talking to some of the other reporters ahead of time, and they all wanted to ask, not about the poll, but they wanted to ask Ontario's education minister at that point, Stephen Lecce, about what they're going to do. And they actually framed it in the question that informing parents was controversial. And you've been around news events with ministers and announcements. You got to wait a lot. And so you're standing around in a gaggle talking and, oh, what are you asking about? What are you doing? And so one of the reporters said, I'm going to ask about this controversial idea. And I said, have you not seen the poll? And I pull out the poll and I show them on my phone. They said, oh, okay. And then they turned around and still framed it as, you have a controversial idea that parents should be informed.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was like the did not know was like 16%, and the people that supported it was 14%. So that is a time that they held the controversial position. But that's the way that newsrooms operate, unfortunately.
Well, I mean, hopefully not every time. I try to stay optimistic about some of this stuff, but I think in this case that this is exactly the direct result of us not having access to other opinions. And this is what happens in echo chambers. People become more extreme in their views. And it used to be in newsrooms that we would be able to pit bias against bias and you do exactly what you did on the ground and produce other evidence, produce other points, argue it out, and come to a more reasonable assessment of the situation. But we don't have that right now. And further, we all are living in the same neighborhoods. We're talking to the same people. We have the same social milieu as all of our colleagues, and there's no outside influence, and it's not healthy.
So what's the future of news then?
This is the difficult part to answer. I don't know. I can suggest some things, but overall, I think the diagnosis is helpful for us and hopefully a relief for the public, because so much of what we talk about in the media about lost trust is external. There's a lot of blaming the consumer. There is a lot of, pushing off our problems onto ideas like misinformation or bad actors online or social media or people's attention fragmentation.
I've watched as politicians have declared stories that are true misinformation and then say that they want to regulate misinformation.
Yes, I have had that experience myself. So I'm very wary of the term misinformation. But I guess the point is just we as a profession need to look inside and decide what it is that we may have done to contribute to this problem of lost trust, and then reorient ourselves towards serving the public. And that's a philosophical argument, but what is going to happen with the business model is another argument entirely. And that is the thing that I find most difficult to grapple with, is how do we get back to a position where the public is prepared to pay for news, and we have stable jobs for our journalists and decent incomes for the range of journalists, not just those at the top, and that people can calm down a little bit in their personal lives and not have such precarious lives that they are overreacting to everything all the time. So I think that's important. And I don't know how we're going to get there in the environment that we're in this country right now, getting back to a place where we are focused on serving the public and focused on reflecting reality. And I also think that there's still a lot of great journalism being done in this country. And one example that I point to, the New York Times is not a perfect paper by any stretch. I think they get lots of stuff wrong, but they do dedicate themselves to the objective method and at least signal to their workforce that is what they are trying to do. And they have a large paid subscriber base in this country. People seem to be prepared to pay for that.
Yeah, and Wall Street Journal did some great reporting just recently on Mark Carney, and as a 2-day, both pieces, very long. I'd like to get back to that. You have turned to Substack. You work with some independent media outlets. The Canadian public, as I said, the erosion of trust isn't as big and deep as it is in the United States. But here's a couple of stats from the this is the Reuters Institute Digital News Report that they did recently on Canada. And it said a majority of Canadians view influencers and online personalities, 54%, as a major source of misinformation, compared with 30% who say news media and journalists are a major source of misinformation. So moving to the online world, but their public isn't ready to fully put trust in. And Substack is different than being an influencer on X or Instagram. There is going to have to, the online world is everything for the future of media, I think, whether it's video, audio, or the written word. But we're going to have to find a way to, that it's able to support individuals like yourself or larger organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also, on the influencer front, I mean, I think there's a couple of different ways to look at it. I'm concerned because those influencers do not feel beholden to the standards and practices that we've been talking about on the left or the right. And so I think that is a concern. I also think in the positive side of things that there is tremendous pressure from the margins right now, and that is healthy. And so you have seen a lot of these big stories that have fallen apart over time, that the pressure from the margins and the pressure from independent media is part of why that narrative didn't hold. And so I think that is a healthy thing. I just would like to see a way in which the influencers are performing at the same kind of standards as journalists. I would like to see that happen. And one of my pipe dreams is that we have sort of I don't believe in journalism schools, but I think it'd be great to have some kind of online platform for training these young people that are really interested in the news and want to perform a public service, and training them in some of the rigors of best practices for how to do that.
Yeah. So to use a recent example, we just recently marked the 5th year anniversary of the Kamloops residential school story and the 215 unmarked graves. I'd like somewhere between nobody died at these schools, which isn't true, and there are 215 children in a mass grave. That last one was something that was put forward by mainstream media with no evidence to back it up. And the influencers who are opposed to it say, oh, no, nobody ever died. We're being lied to. The truth is somewhere in the middle that, yes, children died. No, we haven't found 215 graves. Let's talk about what's actually there. It's taken 5 years for us to get to that point. Not that all of the mainstream media outlets are willing to admit that, but, that is a major issue that had big implications in this country. And we got it wrong, and got it wrong on all sides.
Yeah. I just covered this for Persuasion, an American outlet, and I went through and built a timeline of exactly how that story spread, of each article by article. And it is an astonishing story. It really is an astonishing story. The Globe and Mail editorial board is absolutely correct and appropriate in saying that it was a failure of journalism in this country. I think we need to take a look at how that happened. And as you point out, we are still no consensus on that story yet. As late as last year, Rosemary Barton was on the CBC saying, yes, there have been remains found across the country. CBC issued a correction, then I believe it was the next day. So there's not consensus on this yet. And back to my overall point is that we desperately need in this country a shared set of facts. And the Graves story is a really good example of why. As you say, it's so polarized, and I think that the consequences of us not getting that story right are huge. I mean, first of all, you saw what happened in the aftermath of that story. There were churches burned, there were riots, there were statues toppled. There was an incredible amount of unhappiness about the state of the country. And and also, we are now in a position where we're moving backwards on reconciliation. You have people online who are saying very prejudiced things about Indigenous people, and I think the environment has really eroded in this last 5 years. There's consequences for getting these big stories wrong. And as you say, I think we can hold two ideas in our mind at once. We can say, yes, there is documented abuses at these schools, sexual, physical. We know that there was malnourishment. We know there was neglect. We know that there were deaths, as you say, mainly from tuberculosis. We know all of those facts are on the public record. And we should question stories like, which have been circulating, like saying that children were asked to, dig their friends' graves, that there were babies born incinerators. Babies thrown into incinerators. This other stuff needs to be questioned because the consequences are big, because we need to move forward with reconciliation. We need to heal as a country, and we need facts to do that.
The book is The Trust Spiral: Why Media Needs Objectivity. Tara Henley, the author. Thanks so much for your time, Tara.
Thank you for having me.
Full Comment is a post-media podcast. My name's Brian Lilly, your host. This episode was produced by Andre Proulx. Theme music by Bryce Hall. Kevin Libin is the executive producer. Please hit share. Make sure you hit subscribe as well. Tell your friends about us. Thanks for listening. Until next time, I'm Brian Lilly.
There were so many missed opportunities to catch this before the devastating thing happened.
A third of them we found literally in the phone book. These people were not afraid. They knew that nobody was effectively hunting them. They knew they had escaped justice, that they were going to die in their beds.
When I give talks at law schools, is that the charter ultimately is empowering a minority, and it's empowering a minority that's a guild across the country, and it's a fairly elite guild, and the guild is lawyers.
Families who were split by referendum and brothers and sisters who never talked to each other for years after the referendum because they were so angry at each other because of emotions on both sides.
The reason he was assassinated was not because he was trying to put a satellite into space, but because the gun that he was creating had other applications that made him and the gun very dangerous.
It's finally here. A new season of Canada Did What? Host Media podcast that revisits the big Canadian political events you might think you remember and tells you the real story you never knew. I'm Tristan Hopper. The voices you just heard are from our brand new Season 2. We will unpack some of the pivotal moments that helped define our country, often without a vote, usually without a plan, and sometimes without anyone admitting what they'd done. We'll find out how Canada became a welcoming paradise for untold numbers of Nazi war criminals after the Second World War. We let them build monuments to their wartime exploits and even ended up honoring a Nazi fighter in the House of Commons. And I'm sorry to say that none of that happened by accident. We'll bring you the little-known story of a troubled Canadian rocket scientist who turned to a sinister life of selling giant guns to terrible people. And if that sounds like a spy novel, it ends like one too. You'll hear the behind-the-scenes story of Quebec's attempted secession from Canada and how very close we came to a political crisis that would have made Brexit look like a picnic. You'll hear about how the much-celebrated Charter of Rights and Freedoms turned into something its creators never wanted, and how many of the most extravagant warnings about the document were all quickly proven true. And you'll even hear about how authorities bungled multiple chances to stop the deadliest terrorist attack in our country's history and then proceeded to pretend it never happened. These aren't dusty history lessons. They're stories about power, ambition, madness, and the things about Canada that a lot of people would rather ignore. But not you. You won't want to miss an episode. Subscribe to make sure you get all of Season 2 starting March 2026 anywhere you get your podcasts.